The day Anna Leland arrived in Harrow Creek, Texas, with nothing but a busted wagon wheel, a bruised pride, and $3 to her name, she had no idea that the tall, sun-weathered cowboy who stopped to help her would become the most important person she had ever known. It was the spring of 1878, and the panhandle of Texas was still the kind of place where a woman traveling alone was either brave or foolish, and most men in town could not always tell the difference. The wind blew hard off the plains, carrying red dust and the smell of cattle, and the sun bore down on everything without apology. Harrow Creek was a small settlement clinging to the earth beside a shallow creek lined with cottonwoods, a town made up of a general store, a livery, a saloon called the Dusty Spur, a small church that doubled as a schoolhouse 3 days a week, and a scattering of homes and homesteads that spread out across the surrounding land like seeds tossed by an unsteady hand. Anna had come from San Antonio, where she had spent the last 4 years working as a seamstress in a dress shop owned by a woman named Mrs. Dillard, who had been kind enough but never generous, and who had recently sold the shop and retired to live with her daughter in New Orleans. Anna had saved what she could, bought a horse and a small wagon with her earnings, and set out with a letter in her pocket from a distant cousin, named Ruth, who had moved to the Panhandle country 2 years prior, and had written that there was honest work to be found and good land going cheap for those willing to put in the effort. The letter had taken 3 months to reach Anna and another month before Anna could arrange to leave, and by the time she was crossing the dry flats north of Abilene, she was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. The land out here felt enormous and indifferent in a way that San Antonio, for all its heat and noise and crowded markets, did not. Out here you could see the sky from edge to edge, a great pale dome pressing down on miles of grass and scrub, and it made Anna feel small in a way she had not felt since she was a little girl standing on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico for the first time. She was approximately 12 miles from Harrow Creek, according to the hand-drawn map her cousin Ruth had sent, when the front left wheel of her wagon cracked against a hidden rock buried in the ruts of the trail and snapped clean through the hub. The wagon lurched sideways, and Anna grabbed the bench seat to keep from falling, and her horse, a steady bay mare named Clover, startled and pulled against the harness but did not bolt, which was the only decent thing that happened in the next half hour. Anna climbed down and looked at the wheel and knew immediately that she could not fix it herself. She had no spare, no tools, and no particular knowledge of wagon repair. She sat down on the side of the trail in the red dirt and pressed her hands against her knees and told herself firmly that she was not going to cry, because crying would not fix the wheel and would only leave her with a headache. She had been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes, the sun climbing steadily toward noon and the heat building around her like the inside of an oven, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats coming from the south. She stood up and shaded her eyes with her hand and watched a rider come over the low rise behind her. He was riding a gray horse, a big animal with a long stride, and as he drew closer she could see that he was a lean man in his early 30s, wearing a faded blue shirt and a battered brown hat with a sweat-darkened band. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath the hat, and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same red stone that made up the bluffs to the west. He pulled his horse up when he saw her wagon tilted at its awkward angle and rode closer, and when he swung down from the saddle she could see that he was taller than she had guessed, with the kind of economy of movement that comes from a lifetime of hard outdoor work. He looked at the wheel and then looked at her, and there was nothing in his expression that suggested he found her situation amusing or pitiable. He simply looked at it the way you look at a problem you intend to solve. "Wheel's gone," he said. "Yes," Anna said, "I noticed." Something shifted briefly at the corner of his mouth. "You're heading toward Harrow Creek." "I am. My cousin lives there, Ruth Avery." He nodded slowly as if that information settled something for him. "I know Ruth Avery. She's a good woman. Her husband runs the feed store." He pulled off his hat and pushed a hand through his dark hair and looked back at the wheel. I've got some tools in my saddlebag. Not much, but I might be able to rig something to get you moving. Might not hold long enough for 12 miles, though. Is there another option? He settled his hat back on his head. I could ride into town and bring back someone from the livery with a proper wheel. Take maybe 2 hours, 3 if Hendricks is drunk, which he usually is by mid-morning on a Thursday. Anna glanced at the sky. What day is it? Thursday, he said, and this time the corner of his mouth did more than shift. He almost smiled. Name's Elias Watkins. I've got a ranch about 4 miles east of here. I was heading into town for supplies. Anna Leland, she said, and she held out her hand the way she always did because she had never seen the sense in not doing it. And he looked at her hand for just a moment as if he was slightly surprised, and then he shook it. His hand was large and calloused and warm, and he shook hers the way you shake the hand of a person you intend to take seriously. Miss Leland, he said, I'll tell you what. I'll ride into Harrow Creek, get Hendricks sobered up enough to bring a wheel out here. You'll have to wait, but you've got shade from your wagon and I've got a canteen you can keep until you don't need it anymore. He untied the canteen from his saddle without waiting for her to answer and handed it to her. And then he tied Clover's lead rope to a mesquite bush so the mare would not wander. And he was back in his saddle and riding north before Anna had fully processed the sequence of events. She sat in the thin shade of the wagon and drank sparingly from the canteen and watched hawks circling far overhead and tried to take stock of her situation. She was 26 years old. She had $3, a seamstress kit, 2 dresses, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, a small iron skillet, and a horse she was fond of. She was in the middle of the Texas panhandle in the spring of 1878, and a stranger had just ridden off to get help for her without asking for anything in return. The West, she thought, was stranger and more complicated than she had imagined. Elias was back in less than 2 hours, and he had not only brought Hendricks from the livery, who was indeed somewhat unsteady but functional, but he had also brought a wheel that fit her wagon axle, a jar of axle grease, and a paper bag from the general store that turned out to contain 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth and a small tin of sardines, which he handed to Anna without comment when he saw that she had not eaten. You didn't have to do that, she said. I figured you hadn't eaten, he said simply. Hendricks fixed the wheel in about 40 minutes while Elias held the wagon level and handed tools when asked, and when it was done, Elias helped Anna back up onto the wagon bench and checked the wheel himself, pushing at it and spinning it to make sure it was solid, and then he looked up at her with those steady dark eyes and said, You'll make it fine now. Creek's just off the main trail when you get to town. Ruth's house is the blue one with the green shutters. Thank you, Mr. Watkins, Anna said, and she meant it in a way that she hoped her voice communicated, because she was not always good at making her voice say the things her chest felt. What do I owe you for the wheel? And the biscuits? Nothing, he said. He said it easily, without making a performance of generosity, the way some men did when they wanted you to feel indebted. He just said nothing, as if the question itself was not particularly interesting. He tipped his hat and rode alongside her for the first half-mile or so, which she suspected was, because he wanted to make sure the wheel held, and then he turned his horse east toward his ranch, and she continued north toward Harrow Creek, and she watched him ride away across the plains until he was a small shape against the enormous sky, and she felt something she did not know what to call yet. Ruth Avery was exactly as Anna remembered her from their girlhood in Galveston, only sunburned and happier. She was a small, round-faced woman with bright brown eyes and a laugh that could be heard 3 houses away, and she came running out the front door of the blue house with the green shutters before Anna had even finished tying Clover to the post, and she grabbed Anna by both hands and talked without stopping for 10 minutes about how thin Anna looked, and how the journey must have been terrible, and how there was a pot of beans on the stove and a room in the back that was all ready. Ruth's husband, Tom Avery, was a quiet, solid man who carried grain sacks at the feed store he owned with his brother-in-law, and he shook Anna's hand, and said he was glad she had made it, and then went back to reading a newspaper on the porch, which Anna respected. That evening, over beans and cornbread and a small jar of pickled beets that Ruth was very proud of, Anna told Ruth about the wagon wheel and the man who had ridden to town to help her. Ruth's eyes brightened immediately. "Elias Watkins," she said. "Of course it was. That's exactly the kind of thing Elias does." She passed Anna more cornbread. "He's got a ranch east of town, cattle. He's been here about 6 years, came down from Kansas after the war with the Comanches settled and land opened up. He's a good man, Anna, an honest-to-God good man, and there aren't so many of those out here that you can afford not to notice one when he shows up." "He was very kind," Anna said carefully. Ruth looked at her with the particular expression that women who have been happily married for 5 years use when they are observing an unmarried cousin. It was a look that contained approximately equal parts affection and calculation. Anna recognized it immediately and redirected the conversation to the question of work, which was a subject she genuinely needed to address. Ruth explained that there was a woman on the edge of town named Mrs. Greer who made dresses for the ladies of Harrow Creek and the surrounding ranches. But Mrs. Greer's eyesight had been failing for 2 years, and everyone knew it, and the dresses she had been producing were increasingly imprecise. There was also the fact that the town had been growing slowly but steadily, as more families came out to take up land, and the wives and daughters of those families needed clothes that fit and endured the harsh conditions. Anna's skills as a seamstress were, Ruth said with no false modesty, almost certainly better than anything available in Harrow Creek, and if Anna was willing to hang a sign and let people know she was here, she would have work within the week. Anna woke the next morning before dawn and lay in the narrow back room and listened to the wind and thought about what she was building and what she had left behind. She was not prone to self-pity, but she was honest with herself, and she knew that she had come here not just because Ruth had written to her, but because there had been nothing in San Antonio holding her anymore. Her parents were gone. Her one serious courtship had ended badly 3 years ago when the man she had thought she might marry revealed himself to be a person of small character, which was a polite way of saying he had gambled away his savings and asked her to cover the debt. She had refused and he had left, and she had been relieved, eventually, though it had taken time to get there. She rose and dressed and went to find water for Clover, and in the gray light before sunrise, she stood in the small yard behind Ruth's house and looked east, where the sky was beginning to go pink and gold at the horizon, and she thought that the panhandle was not a gentle landscape, but it had a kind of brutal grandeur that she was starting to understand might be addictive. She saw Elias Watkins again 4 days later. She had set herself up in a corner of Ruth's front room with her sewing kit and the small collection of fabric she had brought with her, and word had spread quickly, as it does in small towns, and she already had 3 women who had come to discuss dresses. She was walking back from the general store, where she had purchased additional thread and a length of calico in a color that Mrs. Patterson had specified with remarkable precision, when she nearly walked directly into Elias Watkins, who was coming around the corner from the direction of the livery. He caught her by the elbow to keep her from stumbling, and let go immediately, and they both stepped back. "Miss Leland," he said, and he smiled properly this time, and it transformed his face in a way that she had not anticipated and was not entirely prepared for. It was a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You made it to town all right." "I did, thanks to you." She held up the paper parcel of thread. "I've started working already. Word gets around fast in a small town. Fastest telegraph line in the West is a woman with news," he said, and then looked briefly as if he was not sure whether that had come out right, but Anna laughed, and the sound of it seemed to settle something between them. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Watkins?" she said. "Elias," he said, "please. Elias, when you helped me on the road and brought the wheel and the biscuits. You said I owed you nothing. I mean it sincerely when I say that I would like to pay you back. For the wheel, at least. I know what wagon wheels cost." He looked at her for a moment with those steady eyes, and the wind moved between them carrying the smell of cottonwoods and distant cattle, and he said, "There is one thing you could do." Anna's heart did something that she chose to classify as a minor cardiac irregularity and not anything more significant. "What is that?" she asked. "Have supper with me," he said. "At the hotel. They do a decent roast on Fridays. It would be good to have proper company." Anna looked at him carefully. He was not a man who said things he did not mean. She was already beginning to understand that. He was not flirting in the shallow way she had encountered in San Antonio, the kind of flirting that was about the performance of attraction rather than anything genuine. He just looked at her with that quiet directness and waited. "That seems like a very favorable exchange," she said. "For me, I mean. The wheel cost more than a supper. The company," he said simply, "is worth more than the wheel." She met his eyes and the wind blew, and somewhere down the street a horse shook its harness, and Anna Leland thought that this was the strangest and most interesting thing that had happened to her in a very long time. "Friday, then," she said. He nodded and tipped his hat and walked on down the street, and Anna stood for a moment in the spring sunshine with her parcel of thread and felt warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. Ruth, when informed of the Friday supper, made the face, the calculation and affection face. "I knew it," she said. "I knew the moment you told me it was Elias who stopped to help you." "It's just supper," Anna said firmly. He was being polite. "Elias Watkins does not eat supper at the hotel with women he is being polite to," Ruth said, with the confidence of a woman who had lived in this town for 2 years and paid close attention. "He eats supper at the hotel alone, about once a week, on account of he doesn't cook much and gets tired of his own ranch food. He has never, in the 2 years I have been here, eaten supper at the hotel with a woman." "Surely that cannot be accurate," Anna said. "Ask Tom," Ruth said, and her expression was so self-satisfied that Anna deliberately changed the subject again. She wore her better dress on Friday, the dark green one that she had made herself 2 years ago, and which she knew fit her well in a way that her other dress, a practical brown thing, did not. She put her hair up properly and pinched her cheeks, which she told herself was not vanity but practicality, because she looked washed out when she was tired and she had been sewing until late the night before to finish Mrs. Patterson's calico. The hotel dining room was not grand, but it was clean and the tables had white cloths, and there was a lamp burning at each table that made the light warm and steady. Elias was already there when she arrived, and he stood when he saw her come in, which she had not expected and which she found she appreciated deeply. He had taken obvious care with his own appearance. His shirt was clean and pressed, his hair was combed, and he had shaved. He looked different without the trail dust, but not less like himself. They talked for 3 hours. Anna had not expected that. She had expected a polite, slightly awkward exchange over food, because that was generally what early suppers with men she did not know well tended to be. But Elias Watkins was not awkward, and he was not a man who made conversation as a performance. He asked her real questions and listened to the answers, and he told her things about himself that she sensed he did not tell everyone. He had grown up in Ohio, she learned, the son of a farmer who had lost the farm. He had come west at 18, worked cattle drives up from Texas through Kansas for years, and then decided he wanted land of his own rather than other men's cattle, and had claimed a section east of Harrow Creek and spent 3 years building it into something that was now a functioning ranch with a small herd of longhorns and a solid stone and timber house. "You built the house yourself," Anna said. "With help," he said. "Tom Avery and a man named Cole Briggs who has a place further north helped me with the heavy timber work. But mostly, yes." He looked at his hands briefly, the way a person does when they are acknowledging something without quite saying it outright. "I wanted it to be right, I wanted it to last." "What do you mean by right?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup slowly. "I mean I wanted it to be the kind of place a person would want to stay in, not just a place to sleep, a home." He looked up at her. My father's farm never felt like that to me. It always felt like something we were losing rather than something we had. I wanted different. Anna thought about her own childhood in Galveston, the house that smelled of sea salt and her mother's cooking, the way the light came through the kitchen window in the mornings. The house was gone now, sold after her parents died within a year of each other, and she had not been back to Galveston since. I understand that, she said quietly, more than you might expect. He looked at her in a way that suggested he believed her and that believing her mattered to him. What made you come out here to the panhandle? He asked. San Antonio is a real city. There's more there than there is here. There's more noise there, she said, and more people. But I had the feeling that there was less for me specifically. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, he said. When they stepped out of the hotel into the cool night air, the sky above Harrow Creek was spectacular, the way a sky can only be spectacular when there is no gas lighting or factory smoke to cloud it, pure black and littered with stars so bright and numerous they looked almost solid. Anna stopped on the hotel porch and looked up without intending to, and Elias stopped beside her. I have never seen a sky like this, she said. Not in Galveston, not in San Antonio. The sky out here is a different thing entirely. It is, he agreed. He was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool air, and he was looking at the sky too, but she had the sense that he was also paying attention to her. It was the first thing I noticed when I came out here, the sky. I thought, if nothing else, a man could not be lonely under a sky like that. She turned to look at him. And was that true? Are you not lonely? He met her eyes and held them, and there was an honesty in his face that she found she could not look away from. I have been, he said, less so lately. She walked home to Ruth's house under that sky thinking about what kind of man says a thing like that. Not as a charm, not as a practiced line, but as a simple statement of truth. She found that she was smiling, and that the smile stayed with her even after she was in bed with the lamp out and the wind moving outside the window. Over the following weeks, Harrow Creek opened itself to Anna with the cautious but genuine warmth of a small community that has learned to value people who are useful and kind. Her sewing was immediately appreciated. She took over the front room at Ruth's house, and within 3 weeks she had established a steady enough income that she could contribute meaningfully to Ruth and Tom's household expenses and save a little besides. Mrs. Patterson's calico dress was such a success that Mrs. Patterson brought her sister, and the sister brought a friend, and word spread further. She also discovered that Harrow Creek had things that San Antonio did not. It had a quality of dailiness, of knowing your neighbors, of being in a place where things were still being made and decided, that Anna found more sustaining than she had expected. She sat on the porch in the evenings with Ruth, and watched the light change over the plains, and listened to the sounds of the town settling into night. And she thought about what Elias had said about wanting a place to stay in rather than just sleep. Elias came into town twice a week, which she gathered was more than he had done before, because Ruth mentioned it with the elaborate casualness of a woman who thinks she is being subtle and is not. He came on Tuesdays for supplies and Saturdays for the mail, and on those days he tended to stop by Ruth's porch in the late afternoon, and they would sit on the porch steps in the long evening light and talk. And sometimes Tom would come out and join them, and sometimes Ruth would bring cold water in a clay pitcher. And it was easy and unhurried in a way that Anna had not experienced in a friendship with a man before, because it was not quite friendship, but it was not yet anything else. And somehow that in-between state was its own pleasure. He brought her things without making a production of them, a handful of early plums from a tree at the edge of his property, a carved wooden spool that he had made, apparently, in the evenings when he had nothing else to do with his hands, and which happened to be perfectly sized for the heavy thread she used for canvas repair work. A small book of poetry that he had found at the back of the general store, slightly water-damaged but legible, which she had mentioned in passing that she missed poetry, having left her books in San Antonio because there had not been room in the wagon. She tried each time to repay these gifts with something equivalent, and each time he deflected gently, and she finally said, one Tuesday evening when he had left a small jar of good honey on the porch without telling her, and she had figured out it was him because Ruth had that face, "Elias Watkins, you're going to have to stop giving me things I cannot repay." He looked at her with that slight half-smile. "I give you what I want to give you," he said. "No ledger required." "I don't like feeling in debt," she said. She said it simply, but there was something real behind it, and she thought he heard that. He was quiet for a moment. "You're not in debt," he said. "But if it bothers you, then let me put it this way. Everything you give me in return when you sit here and talk to me in the evenings is more than fair exchange." She looked at him in the late afternoon light, the golden kind that makes the plains look like something from a painting, and she thought about what it meant that a man whose company she sought had come to value her company equally, and her chest felt full of something warm and slightly terrifying. "You are very unusual," she told him. "I have been called worse," he said, and smiled the full smile, and she felt the full force of it like stepping into sunlight from a dark room. The afternoon that changed everything came about 6 weeks after Anna's arrival in Harrow Creek. It was a hot June day, and she had been sewing since early morning and her eyes were beginning to ache, and she decided to walk to the creek to sit in the shade of the cottonwoods and rest. She took a book and her straw hat and went down the path through the willows to the bank of the creek, which was low in early summer but still running, green and cool-sounding in its shallow course. She had been there perhaps 20 minutes when she heard footsteps on the path and looked up to find Elias, who had apparently also decided that the creek was a better option than whatever he had been doing. He stopped when he saw her, and there was something different in his expression, not the usual composed steadiness but something more open, almost uncertain. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't know you were here. I can go." "Please don't," she said, and meant it. He sat down on the bank a few feet from her, not close enough to be importunate but close enough to talk easily, and he took off his hat and set it on his knee and looked at the water. He was quiet for a while, and Anna had learned enough about him by now to know that his silence was not uncomfortable and that it usually meant he was working towards something. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," she said. He turned to look at her. "What do you want? From being here, from the future? What do you actually want?" It was such a direct question, asked so simply, without any of the typical social padding men put around questions like that Anna found herself answering honestly before she had time to consider whether to be guarded. "I want a life that is mine," she said. "I want work that matters and a place that feels like it belongs to me and people I can depend on and who depend on me. I want to stop feeling like I am waiting for my life to begin." She paused. "That probably sounds very plain." "It sounds very honest," he said. "And it does not sound plain to me. It sounds like exactly what a person should want." "What do you want?" she asked. He looked at the water again, the light moving on it through the cottonwood leaves. "The same things," he said, "mostly. The ranch is mine and I've built it to a place where it works. The work matters, but—" He stopped and she waited and he went on. "The house is too quiet. I built it big enough for more than one person and I live in it alone and it echoes in ways a house shouldn't." The air between them had changed subtly, had become more charged. A kingfisher went past over the creek, a bright streak of blue and orange, and neither of them looked at it. "Elias," she said quietly. "Anna," he said. And then, with the same directness he brought to everything, "I am very aware that you have only been here a short time and that I am at risk of moving faster than is sensible or welcome." "You are not," she said, and surprised herself with how certain she sounded, because she was, in fact, certain. "You are not moving faster than is welcome." He turned to look at her fully, and his expression was something she had not seen on his face before, something unguarded and hopeful and very slightly undone. And she thought she had never looked at anyone and felt so clearly that she was looking at a person she knew, truly knew, despite the short time of it. He reached out and took her hand where it rested on the grass beside her, just took it gently and held it, and they sat by the creek in the cottonwood shade with the water running past, and the big Texas sky above, and said nothing else for a while, because nothing else needed saying. The next Sunday he took her out to his ranch. He came to Ruth's house in a clean wagon with a horse he had hitched special, a fine chestnut called Marshall, and he had put a cushion on the wagon bench which she pretended not to notice, because she thought it might embarrass him if she pointed it out. Ruth watched them leave from the porch with an expression of intense satisfaction. The ride east took about 40 minutes, through country that shifted as they moved away from the creek and out onto the higher plain, the grass rolling away in long ripples under the morning wind. Elias told her about the land as they drove, explaining the geography in a way that made it feel known and navigable rather than alien, pointing out the water sources and the grays and the landmarks. She could hear in his voice how much he loved it, not sentimentally but practically, the way a person loves something they have built and tended and watched grow. The house came into view around a low rise, and Anna caught her breath. It was not what she had expected, though she was not sure what she had expected. It was a solid stone and timber structure, not large by the standards of the East but substantial by frontier standards, with a covered porch across the front and 2 chimneys, and windows that faced south and east to catch the morning light. There were corrals to one side and a good-sized barn of weathered wood, and a kitchen garden that had been planted but not, she could see, maintained with any particular attention, the vegetables coming up surrounded by weeds in a way that suggested the gardener had gotten them started but lost track of them. "It's beautiful," she said, and she was not being polite. She meant the bones of it, the way it sat on the land as if it belonged there. He helped her down from the wagon, and she could see that he was watching her face as she looked at the house, and that what he saw there satisfied him. He showed her through the inside, which was clean but spare, the main room with a stone fireplace and a table and 2 chairs, a kitchen that had good equipment but nothing decorative, 2 bedrooms, one of which had furniture and one of which was used for storage. The floors were swept and the windows were washed. She understood that he had prepared for her visit with some care. On the back porch there was a bench and a view of the plain stretching away south, a view that went forever, and she sat on the bench and looked at it while he brought water and then sat beside her, and she said, "You were right. This is not a place to sleep. This is a home." "Could be," he said, with a quietness that meant something more than the words. She looked at him sideways. "Is that an observation or a question?" "I'm working up to a question," he said, with that slight self-aware humor she had come to love. "I'm not quite there yet." She felt warmth rise through her chest. "I will be waiting," she said. "I am not going anywhere." He looked at her with those dark eyes and the morning light on his face, and said, "Good." They spent the day at the ranch. She walked the corrals with him, and he showed her the herd, a mixed group of longhorns with the characteristic long horns and tough constitutions that made them ideal for the rough panhandle country. He had a young hand named Pedro Santos who had been working for him for 2 years and who was, Elias said, the best horseman he had encountered in 10 years of working cattle. Pedro was a young man of about 20, quiet and skilled, and possessed of a dignified ease with horses that was plainly natural rather than learned. And he greeted Anna with a respectful nod and went back to his work without lingering, which she appreciated. In the afternoon, she weeded the kitchen garden while Elias fixed a broken fence rail, and they talked across the yard in the companionable way of people who have gotten past the careful stage and into the comfortable one, calling remarks back and forth about the progress of the tomatoes and whether the fence had been kicked by a cow or by a horse. It was, she thought, the most contented afternoon she had remembered in years. It had the quality of already belonging, which she knew was fast but did not doubt. When he drove her back to town in the late afternoon, the sky was doing things with color that she could not adequately have described, pink and orange and a deep purple at the edges, and Elias pulled up the wagon on a rise to let her look at it. They sat in silence watching the sunset move through its changes, and his arm was across the back of the bench behind her, not quite touching her shoulders but very close, and she leaned very slightly toward him, and he shifted so that his arm came to rest around her gently. "Anna," he said quietly into the side of her hair. "Yes," she said. Her voice was soft. "I would like to court you properly," he said. "If you're willing, I would like to do this right." She turned to look at him, close enough that she could see the texture of his skin and the honesty in his eyes. "I am willing," she said. "Very willing, Elias." He smiled, the full one, and the sunset lit up behind him like something staged by the Almighty to make a point. And she laughed, because the whole thing was almost too much. And he laughed too. And they drove back to Harrow Creek with the evening gathering around them and the warmth of the day still in the earth and everything ahead of them still being made. Ruth and Tom received the news of the official courtship with very different types of enthusiasm. Ruth's was immediate and vocal and involved a great deal of hugging. Tom shook Elias' hand the next time he saw him and said, "You're a lucky man," with no qualification, and Elias said, "I know it," with equal directness, and that was apparently sufficient for Tom, who considered the matter settled. The weeks that followed were the best of Anna's adult life. She would have said so plainly if asked, because she was not a person who dealt in false modesty about her own feelings. The combination of building her work in Harrow Creek and deepening what was happening between her and Elias gave every day a quality of forward motion and purpose that she had been missing without fully knowing it. Her business grew steadily. She had established a reputation by July for work that was precise and durable, which in the panhandle was exactly what women needed, because dresses and shirts out here had to stand up to hard use, to wind and sun and physical labor, and the delicate constructions that might have been appropriate for a drawing room in the East were not what anyone required. She adapted her skills for the environment and found that she enjoyed the problem-solving aspect of it. She made a divided riding skirt for Mrs. Hendricks that was the talk of 3 counties. She repaired a leather saddle pouch for Pedro Santos and charged him nothing because she liked him, and he brought her a bunch of late summer wildflowers the following week without explanation. Elias came to town every Tuesday and Saturday without fail, and on Sunday afternoons she went to the ranch. They fell into a rhythm that was so natural it almost seemed as if it had already existed, and they had simply stepped into it. They read to each other in the evenings on the porch, taking turns with whatever book was at hand. They cooked together sometimes on Sundays at the ranch, attempting recipes with whatever was available and producing results that ranged from genuinely good to entertainingly terrible. He was patient and she was stubborn, and they were both honest. And when they disagreed about things, which happened, they disagreed without rancor and generally came to something neither of them had thought of alone. He kissed her for the first time in July, on a Sunday evening on the ranch porch when the sun was finally gone and the first stars were coming out. He had been telling her about his years on the cattle drives, the long months on the trail with nothing but sky and cattle and hard work, and she had been listening with her chin in her hand, and he stopped mid-sentence and looked at her and said, "May I?" Which was not a thing she had expected him to say, and which undid her completely, and she said yes, and he leaned forward and kissed her gently, briefly, and the stars came out fully above them, and the ranch was quiet around them, and she thought she might sit on that porch and stay there for the rest of her life. There were complications, as there always are. The most significant came in August, in the form of a man named Dale Hawthorne. Hawthorne was a land speculator, which was a polite name for a man who traveled the frontier looking for properties he could acquire cheaply and sell at a profit to larger interests. He arrived in Harrow Creek with a fine horse, a suit that was too good for the Texas heat, and a manner that was smooth on the surface and rotten underneath in the way that Anna had learned, through experience, to identify quickly. He set up at the hotel and began making the rounds of the local landowners with proposals that sounded generous and were not. He came to see Elias. Anna was not there when he came, but Elias told her about it the following Tuesday, his expression flat and careful in the way it got when he was controlling something. "He wants to buy the eastern quarter of my range," Elias said. "Offered me what sounds like a fair price but is about a third of what the water rights alone are worth." "What did you tell him?" Anna asked. "I told him no," Elias said simply. "But he's persistent. He went to see Briggs the same day and then the Hoffmans to the south. He's trying to put together a block of land to sell to the cattle syndicate out of Abilene. If he gets enough of the surrounding range, he can squeeze out the smaller ranchers by controlling water access." This was a real danger in the West, and Anna knew enough by now to understand its implications. Water was life in the panhandle. A man who controlled the water sources controlled everything. Hawthorne came to see her as well, which she had not anticipated. He found her at Ruth's house on a Wednesday morning when she was in the front room sewing, and he knocked and came in when Ruth said come in, and he sat down across from Anna with his hat in his lap and his smile deployed at full power. "Miss Leland," he said, "I understand you've become acquainted with Elias Watkins." "I have," she said, without looking up from her sewing. "I wonder if you might speak with him about my proposal," Hawthorne said. "I think a woman of your intelligence would understand the advantages. Mr. Watkins is sitting on capital he could have in his hand tomorrow, and the eastern quarter isn't his best grazing land." Anna set her work down and looked at him directly. She had grown up around merchants, and she knew a man trying to use someone as a lever when she saw one. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said pleasantly, "I am a seamstress. I don't advise Mr. Watkins on the sale of his land, and I would not do so even if I had opinions on the matter, which I don't offer freely to people I've just met." Hawthorne's smile did not flicker. He was practiced. "I meant no offense." "None taken," she said, which was not entirely true. "Is there something I can help you with? I make very good shirts. The heat out here is hard on fabric." He left without ordering a shirt, which she had known he would. She told Elias about the visit that Saturday, and he listened without interrupting, and when she was done he said, "He's desperate. When a man like that starts working the women, he knows he's losing." "Is he losing?" she asked. "He hasn't gotten what he came for," Elias said. "Cole Briggs told him to take his proposal and file it somewhere uncomfortable. The Hoffmans sent their son to ride him off the south pasture, and Tom Avery has been letting people know what Hawthorne's business model actually looks like." "Tom," Anna said, surprised. Tom Avery was one of the quieter men she had encountered. Elias smiled. "Tom has been in this town long enough to know that when a man in a fine suit shows up and starts charming people, everybody should take a closer look. He did some asking around. Hawthorne pulled the same scheme in Clarendon 2 years ago and left 3 families without water access. Hawthorne left Harrow Creek 10 days later without having acquired anything, and the general consensus of the town was that this was a satisfactory outcome. The episode had the side effect of pulling the community together in a way that Anna found deeply instructive about how these small frontier settlements functioned. People out here watched out for each other not out of charity alone, but out of practical understanding that they needed each other to survive, and that a threat to one man's water was a threat to everyone's cattle. What she also noticed and filed away quietly was that during the whole episode Elias had been the person people came to, the person whose judgment they trusted and whose steadiness they relied on. He was not a loud man, and he did not perform leadership, but he had a gravity that made people naturally orient toward him in situations of uncertainty, and she found that watching him in that role added something to what she already felt for him that she had not expected, a respect that went alongside the warmth and deepened it. September brought harvest weather, and with it a change in the texture of life in Harrow Creek that Anna was beginning to recognize as seasonal. The light shifted to something golden and horizontal. The wind changed direction. The smell of the earth was different. Ruth put up preserves for 3 weekends in a row and enlisted Anna's help, and they spent those long kitchen afternoons talking in the way that women who genuinely like each other can talk, about everything and nothing, deep and shallow in turns. And Anna thought she had not had this kind of friendship since girlhood and was surprised by how much she had missed it. One September afternoon, when Anna and Elias were sitting on the ranch porch watching the long golden light move across the plain, he said, without preamble, "I want to ask you something important." She set down the mending she had brought with her, because she always brought something to keep her hands busy, and she turned to look at him. He reached into his shirt pocket and brought out a ring, a simple thing of silver with a small garnet set in it, not elaborate but clearly chosen with care. He held it between his fingers and looked at it for a moment and then looked at her. "I am not a man who makes speeches," he said. "You know that. And you know who I am by now, or I hope you do, because I have tried very hard not to be anyone other than who I actually am, because I thought if you were going to be with me it should be me you were with and not some version of me I made up for the purpose." He looked at her steadily. "Anna, I love you. I have been trying to find a way to say it that is adequate, and I don't think I can, so I'm just saying it straight. I love you and I want you to marry me and live here with me and make this house into what I always knew it was meant to be. If you're willing." Anna sat very still for a moment, not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted to be fully present in the moment, to feel all of it without missing any part by rushing. The ranch was quiet around them and the light was extraordinary, and the man in front of her was looking at her with everything open in his face, all the honesty and hope and love of him. And she thought of the creek bank in June when he had taken her hand, and the biscuits on the trail in April, and every evening on the porch, and all the plums and the carved spool and the book of poetry. And she thought that she had come to the panhandle looking for a life that was hers, and she had found more than that. "Yes," she said. "Elias, yes." He put the ring on her finger and she kissed him, properly this time, unhurried and full of everything she felt, and he held her in the way that felt like the beginning of a permanent thing, and the ranch sat around them in the September light like a witness. Ruth's reaction was everything Anna had expected and deserved. Tom shook both their hands and then hugged Anna, which was not something Tom Avery did casually, and told her she was family now, which made her eyes sting. They were married in October, at the small church that was also a schoolhouse, on a Saturday when the weather was exactly what you would have asked for if you were praying for good weather, crisp and clear, and with a sky of deep blue. Anna wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that moved beautifully, because she had spent weeks on it and put everything she knew into the making of it. She carried a bundle of prairie wildflowers that Ruth had gathered early that morning. Elias wore a clean white shirt and his good boots, and had his hair combed and looked at her when she came through the door of the church with an expression that she knew she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The whole town came. Harrow Creek was not a large place, but it was a complete one, and everyone came. Mrs. Patterson came and cried. Pedro Santos stood in the back with his hat in his hands and nodded when she passed. Cole Briggs, the big rancher from the north, came and brought his wife Maria, who brought a cake she had made that morning. Tom Avery stood up as witness for Elias and Ruth stood up for Anna, and the minister, a gentle man named Reverend Coles, performed the ceremony with evident pleasure, because he liked performing weddings and found funerals trying and was grateful for the opportunity to do the former. When Elias slid the ring onto her finger for the second time and said the words, his voice was steady and clear and low, and she said her own words back to him in the same key, and they looked at each other through the whole of it. And when Reverend Coles said he could kiss his bride, Elias did it properly, not a brief formal thing but a real kiss that communicated everything. And the people gathered in that church cheered as if they were at a rodeo, which Anna found she loved entirely. The first year of their marriage was the most instructive of Anna's life. Not that it was difficult in the ways she had feared difficulty might come, because it was not. They did not have the adjustment struggles she had heard about, the clashing of habits and expectations that was supposed to make the early years hard. Perhaps they had taken enough time before the wedding to know each other truly that there were fewer surprises to navigate. Or perhaps they were simply well matched in the deep ways that matter most, in temperament, and in what they valued and in how they faced the world. There were adjustments, of course. She moved into the ranch house after the wedding and had to learn the rhythms of a working cattle operation, the early mornings and the physical demands, and the particular calendar of ranch life that was different from the calendar of a town. The kitchen garden that she had noticed on her first visit became her project, and she attacked it with methodical pleasure, putting in the effort over the fall and the following spring to make it genuinely productive. By the second summer she had tomatoes and squash and beans, and a small herb bed that made a real difference to the cooking. She kept her sewing work. She had been clear about this from the beginning, and Elias had been clear that he had no intention of asking her to give it up. She set up a proper workspace in the ranch house, with good light from the south-facing window, and she continued to take clients from town and from the surrounding ranches, sometimes driving into Harrow Creek herself, and sometimes having women come out to the ranch for fittings, which they seemed to enjoy as an occasion. The work was hers and she kept it that way, and it made her feel anchored in herself in a way that was separate from being Elias' wife, which she also valued and which he understood. The ranch grew steadily under Elias' management. He was not a man who gambled on expansion, but one who built carefully and well, adding to the herd only as he could support it, improving the infrastructure, paying Pedro Santos fairly and treating him with the basic dignity that was, Anna had noticed, not universal in how ranch hands were treated in Texas. Pedro stayed, and in the second year Elias took on a second hand named Will Garrett, a young man from Missouri who was enthusiastic and not yet skilled but was learning quickly. The one great injustice of the frontier that Anna thought about with regularity was the situation of the people who had been here before all of them. The Comanche had been the lords of the panhandle and had been removed from it through a combination of warfare and federal force only a few years before, and their absence was present in the landscape in a way that she could feel, in the names of places and the geography of the terrain, and sometimes in small things found in the earth that were clearly older than anything the settlers had built. She was not the only person in Harrow Creek who thought about this. Reverend Coles spoke about it with a conflicted honesty that she respected. Elias, when she raised it directly with him one evening, was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I know what this land was before it was mine. I think about it. I don't know what the right accounting looks like, but I know that pretending there is nothing to account for would be dishonest." She loved him for that. In the second spring of their marriage, Anna discovered she was carrying a child. She told Elias on a Tuesday morning when he came in from the early chores, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of coffee, and she looked up at him when he came in and said simply, "We are going to have a baby." He stopped in the doorway and looked at her with an expression that moved through several things quickly, surprise and then something profound and overwhelmed and tender, and he crossed the room and knelt down beside her chair and took both her hands in his and held them, and he did not say anything for a moment, just held her hands and looked at her. "Are you well?" he said finally. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she said. "And not interested in the smell of onions, which is a nuisance because I planted a great many onions." He laughed, and it was the real laugh, the one he saved for things that genuinely caught him. "We'll get through the onion situation," he said. He pressed his forehead against her hands. "Anna, a family." "A family," she agreed, and felt the words settle into the house around them like something that had always been meant to be there. Ruth came out to the ranch when she heard, because Ruth heard everything within approximately 48 hours of its occurrence, and she hugged Anna for a long time and then made several practical suggestions about what to expect, because Ruth was the kind of person whose love expressed itself through useful information, which Anna found deeply comforting. The pregnancy was not an easy one in the first months. Anna was genuinely sick in the mornings and sometimes into the afternoons, and the heat of the second summer was harder than the first because she was carrying the child through the worst of it. but Elias was patient in ways that were specific and thoughtful rather than generically solicitous. He took over the kitchen garden watering, so she didn't have to be in the full sun in the hottest part of the day. He drove her into town to see Mrs. Greer, who had delivered a great many babies and whose eyesight might have failed but whose hands were still steady, and whose knowledge was considerable. He kept the house stocked with the particular crackers that she had discovered helped with the nausea. He sat with her in the evenings on the porch and read to her when she was too tired to hold a book, his voice low and steady in the dark. "You don't have to read to me," she told him one evening. "You must be tired too." "I like reading to you," he said simply, without looking up from the page. She settled back into her chair and let him read and watch the stars come out over the plain, and thought that happiness of this quality, this particular compound of the ordinary and the extraordinary, was the thing people spent their whole lives reaching for, and she had found it in a panhandle town in 1878 because a wagon wheel broke on a Thursday. Their son was born in November, in the ranch house, with Mrs. Greer in attendance and Ruth present for moral support, and Elias waiting in the front room in a state of tension that Pedro Santos, who was waiting in the barn because he had not been asked to wait in the house, but had clearly felt the need to stay close, later described as the most alarming thing he had witnessed on the ranch, including the time a bull got into the corn supply. The birth was hard but not dangerously so, and when Mrs. Greer brought the child out to Elias and put the baby in his arms, his face did the thing that she heard about later from Ruth, who had followed Mrs. Greer out to see his reaction, which was that it went completely open, all the careful composure gone, and he looked at his son with an expression that Ruth said made her cry immediately, and she was not generally a crier. They named the boy James, after Elias' grandfather, who had been the one steady person in an otherwise uncertain childhood, and the middle name Thomas, after Tom Avery, because Tom had been the first person in Harrow Creek to make Elias feel genuinely welcome when he had arrived 6 years before, and because Tom Avery deserved more acknowledgement than he typically received. When Mrs. Greer finally let Elias into the bedroom, he came and sat beside Anna on the bed and looked at James, who was small and furiously red-faced and already apparently opinionated about the temperature of the room, and then he looked at Anna with a quality of emotion that was too large for the expression he was trying to contain it in, and she reached up and put her hand against his jaw and said, "We are all fine." "I know," he said. "I know." But he held her hand there against his face and closed his eyes for a moment like a man steadying himself after something has shaken him, and she understood that the waiting had been very hard, and that he loved them both so much it was almost frightening to him. James Watkins grew with the ranch through his first year, an easy-tempered baby who became an interested and mobile small child with his father's dark hair and his mother's particular stubbornness of will, which manifested early and clearly, and made Elias laugh every time with a helpless pride that he did not try to conceal. The ranch continued to grow. By the time James was 1 year old, Elias had added a proper summer kitchen to the house, and Anna had expanded her sewing space into the second bedroom that had previously been used for storage. She had also begun, quietly, and without making a significant announcement of it, to offer sewing lessons to the daughters of some of the homestead families who were coming into the area in growing numbers. There were families from all directions arriving in the Panhandle in 1879 and 1880, as the news of available land continued to spread, and many of the young women who came with their families had practical skills, but not the fine sewing that would allow them to mend and make properly. And Anna found that teaching was something she was good at in ways that surprised her. One afternoon in James's second year, when she was sitting on the ranch porch with James asleep in the basket beside her and her sewing in her lap and the afternoon going golden around her, she heard Elias come up from the barn, and he stopped at the foot of the porch steps and looked at the picture she made without saying anything, and she looked up and found him watching her with that expression she knew so well by now. The one that she had first seen fully on the creek bank in June of 1878 when he had taken her hand, the one that said she was the best thing he had ever had the sense to pursue. "What?" she said, smiling. "Nothing," he said. He came up the steps and leaned down and kissed her temple and then looked into the basket at his sleeping son. "Thought about something today while I was fixing the south fence." "What did you think about?" He pulled the other chair close and sat down. "That first day, on the trail, your wagon wheel." "I have thought about that day a great deal," she said. "I've thought about it more than I probably admitted to myself at the time," he said. "I knew, when I saw you sitting there in the dust and the heat, not crying, just looking at that wheel like it was a problem and not a catastrophe, I knew there was something particular about you." "The wheel was very much a catastrophe," she said. "No," he said firmly. "The wheel was a broken wheel. You were the one who made it not a catastrophe by treating it like a problem. That's different." He reached over and took her hand the way he had taken it on the creek bank, just picked it up and held it. "I'm glad it broke." She looked at the plain stretching away south, the endless grass, the sky that went on forever above it, and James sleeping in his basket with his small fist curled under his chin, and Elias' hand warm around hers, and the house behind her solid and present in the way that things built to last are solid and present. And she thought about who she had been when she set out from San Antonio in the spring of 1878 with $3 and a broken future and a bay mare named Clover. And who she was now. "So am I," she said. By the time James was 3 years old, the Watkins Ranch had become one of the better established operations in the eastern panhandle, which was a source of quiet satisfaction to Elias and no small pride to Anna, who felt that she had been part of the building of it in ways that were real and permanent. The kitchen garden was a genuine enterprise now, producing enough that Anna traded surplus with other families for eggs and butter, and things they did not grow themselves. The sewing business continued, and she had by now 3 young women she was teaching formally, 2 of whom were the daughters of homestead families, and one of whom was Pedro Santos's younger sister, Lucia, who had come to live with Pedro after their mother died in Mexico, and who turned out to have a natural talent for fine work that Anna found deeply satisfying to develop. Harrow Creek itself had grown. It had a second general store now, and a proper doctor had arrived in 1880, a young man from Virginia named Dr. Halliday, who was very good and slightly overwhelmed by the variety of conditions the frontier produced. The church had been enlarged and separated from the schoolhouse at last, and there was a proper school teacher, Miss Frances Keene, who had come from Ohio and who was cheerful and firm in equal measure, and was doing remarkable work with the range of children who appeared in her classroom. Ruth and Tom Avery had expanded the feed store and had 2 children of their own now, a boy named Daniel and a girl named Clara, and James Watkins was particularly fond of Clara, which Ruth found extremely funny and Anna found entertaining. The second child came when James was 4, and this time the birth was somewhat easier, or at least felt that way to Anna, possibly because she knew what to expect and possibly because the baby arrived with less drama. It was a girl, and they named her Mary after Anna's mother, with the middle name Ruth, which made Ruth Avery cry in a way that she was neither prepared for nor remotely embarrassed about. Mary was from the beginning different from James in ways that were interesting rather than challenging, where James was observant and cautious. Mary was immediate and loud, where James considered. Mary plunged in, and by the time she was 2 she had Pedro Santos completely managed and Will Garrett entirely captivated, and her father absolutely finished with the very concept of authority in any form that involved telling her no. "You have to hold the line," Anna told Elias one evening after Mary had successfully argued herself out of an early bedtime for the 3rd consecutive night. "She makes very good points," Elias said, and the expression on his face was so helpless and so full of love that Anna could not maintain her own position of principled firmness and ended up laughing. "You are impossible," she told him. "I am consistent," he said. "She is a person with opinions, I respect that." "She is 2 years old," Anna said. "Some people arrive knowing who they are," he said with genuine equanimity. "Our daughter is apparently one of them." The winter of Mary's second year brought the first real test of their preparedness that the ranch had faced. A 3-day blizzard that came in fast and buried the panhandle under 2 feet of snow and ice, dropping temperatures to the lowest any of the long-timers in Harrow Creek could remember. Elias and Pedro and Will spent the storm hours keeping the cattle from drifting and breaking through the snow to get to the stock water, and Anna kept the house warm and the children fed, and managed the enforced confinement of 2 small children with the same methodical calm that she brought to problems that did not cry as loudly. When the storm broke and Elias came in from the barn on the 3rd morning, frost-burned and exhausted, but with the look of a man who had come through something and not been broken by it, Anna met him at the door with hot coffee and a clean shirt and James at her side, looking at his father, with the particular hero worship that boys of 4 feel for fathers who have been doing something obviously difficult, and Mary in her arms making the face she made when she wanted to be the center of attention immediately. Elias took the coffee and took Mary from Anna's arms in a single movement and stood in the doorway drinking the coffee with one arm and holding his daughter with the other, and he looked at Anna over the rim of the cup and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. The storm was over. Everything and everyone was intact. The ranch had held. They lost about 12 head in the blizzard, which was bad but not devastating, and the spring came in strong behind the hard winter, and the grass was extraordinary and the remaining herd thrived, and by summer Elias had made back the loss and more. Pedro Santos had also, over that difficult winter, met and fallen in love with the daughter of a homestead family named Torres, a young woman named Elena, and by autumn of that year they were married in the same church where Elias and Anna had been married, and Anna made Elena's dress, the most beautiful thing she had made to that point, a cream and ivory construction that made Elena weep when she saw herself in the looking glass, which was the intended response. Anna stood in the church watching Pedro Santos look at his bride with the particular expression of a man who cannot believe his luck, and she felt Elias' hand find hers in the pew beside her, and she squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back without looking away from the ceremony. And she thought about the afternoon on the trail in April of 1878 when a wagon wheel broke and a man in a blue shirt rode up on a gray horse, and said, with no particular ceremony, that the wheel was gone. The years laid themselves down one after another with the particular quality of years that are both full and fast, full in the living and fast in the remembering. James grew from a small boy with his father's eyes into a serious, capable young man who was at home on a horse by the time he was 6, and could read fluently by the time he was 7, thanks to Miss Keene's unflinching attention. Mary grew from a loud and opinionated baby into a loud and opinionated girl of remarkable clarity of mind, who at 5 years old told Lucia Santos that sewing was all right, but she wanted to learn to rope cattle, a statement that Lucia reported to Anna with barely concealed amusement. "She can learn to rope cattle and sew," Anna said. "There is no reason a person cannot do both." "Miss Anna," Lucia said, with the smile she used when Anna said something that pleased her, "you sound exactly like Mary." Anna taught James to sew, firmly and without apology, because she believed it was a useful skill regardless of sex, and James took to it with the same methodical patience he brought to everything else and became genuinely competent, though he never loved it the way Lucia did or the way Mary, who came around to it after the roping, eventually did. Elias taught Mary to rope at the age of 7, in the South Corral on a Saturday afternoon, while James watched from the fence with an expression of carefully maintained dignity, and Pedro Santos leaned on the gate post, trying not to laugh. Mary got it on the fourth attempt and let out a sound that the cattle on the far end of the range probably heard. And Elias caught her up off the ground in the same motion that he had been using since she was an infant, the big, effortless lift that she loved, and that she would probably be too big for before either of them acknowledged it. Anna watched from the porch with her sewing in her lap in the September light on everything, and thought about a conversation she had attempted on a porch in another September, years ago now, about what a person wanted from life. "I want a life that is mine." She had gotten it. It was enormous and ordinary and daily and extraordinary. It was a ranch and a family, and work that she loved and a town that she belonged to and a man who had taken her hand on a creek bank when she was still a stranger to him, and had never, in all the years since, let it go. In the late autumn of 1884, 6 years after Anna's wagon wheel had broken on the trail to Harrow Creek, Elias came into the house one evening after the children were in bed and found Anna at the kitchen table with her accounts book and the lamp burning low, and he sat down across from her and watched her work for a moment in the comfortable silence that had become the texture of their evenings. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked up from the figures. "I have been trying to think of how to say this properly for a while," he said. "And I keep running into the same problem, which is that the only way I know how to say things is straight, and some things are large enough that straight feels inadequate." "Say it straight," she said. "You know I prefer that." He looked at her across the table, across the lamp and the accounts book and the 6 years of their life together, and he said, "Anna, I want you to know that every single morning when I wake up in this house and you are here, I think that this is more than I ever expected to have. More than I knew to want. And I am not a man who says things like that easily, but I am a man who means them, and you should know it." She set her pen down and looked at him, and the lamp made everything warm and close, and outside the window the panhandle dark went on forever, enormous and full of stars. "I know it," she said. "I have always known it." He reached across the table and took her hand, and she let him, and he held it the way he had always held it, with the same steady warmth of a man who did not take the thing he held for granted. "Good," he said. She covered his hand with her other one. "Elias." "Yes." "Thank you," she said, "for stopping on the road, for the wheel, for the biscuits, for all of it." He looked at her with those dark eyes in the lamplight and said, with the simplest honesty she had ever heard, "Thank you for sitting in the road." She laughed, and he smiled, and the house around them was solid and warm and full of the sleeping sounds of their children, and the kitchen garden was put to bed for winter outside the window, and on the mantel in the next room was the small book of poetry he had given her in the early days, and the carved wooden spool, and the garnet ring that she still wore alongside her wedding band, all of it still there, all of it still meaning what it had meant when it was given. The life they had built was not a simple one, and it was not a lucky one in the easy sense, because they had worked for every part of it and made decisions in the hard conditions of a frontier existence where the weather and the market and the land itself made no accommodation for sentiment. But it was theirs, fully and completely theirs, and it had the quality of something built to last. James Watkins, who was 6 years old and already beginning to have the particular look of his father without being aware of it, would grow up on that ranch and come to love it with the same intelligent, particular love his father had always had, the kind that is about knowing a place deeply rather than simply possessing it. Mary Watkins would grow up to be everything her early promise suggested and more, a person of remarkable capability and loud opinion, who learned to rope and to sew and eventually to do the ranch accounts better than anyone, and who at 17 would tell her parents with great certainty that she intended to be a doctor, inspired by Dr. Halliday and his work in Harrow Creek, and who would, in the fullness of time, achieve it, though that was still many years ahead. Pedro Santos and Elena had a daughter they named Rosa, and Lucia Santos married a rancher named Alvarez from the North Country and moved away but came back twice a year and brought good food and loud conversation. Ruth and Tom Avery's children grew up alongside the Watkins children in the way that children do in small communities, tangled together in school and church, and the general shared life of the town. Harrow Creek grew and remained itself, which is the best thing a small town can do. The cottonwoods along the creek grew larger. The schoolhouse became only a schoolhouse, and a proper church stood beside it. A newspaper started up in 1882, a single-page affair written and printed by a man named Henderson who was opinionated about everything and wrong about some of it but committed to all of it. The telegraph line reached town in 1883 and made the world feel smaller, which was both comforting and somewhat melancholy. And through all of it, through the seasons and the growth and the change, there was the ranch east of town with its stone and timber house and its kitchen garden and its corrals, and inside it a man and a woman who had found each other on a dusty trail in the spring of 1878 when a wagon wheel broke, and who had built something together that the flat, enormous, beautiful, difficult, extraordinary West was exactly the right place to build. On the evening of their 6th wedding anniversary, Elias saddled 2 horses after supper while Ruth kept the children, and he and Anna rode east until they were out past the last of the corrals, and the lights of the house were small behind them, and they stopped on the rise where you could see the plain going away in every direction under the sky. The stars were out in full, the way they always were out here, the vast unimpeded sky of the panhandle doing what it always did, which was making everything feel both small and part of something enormous. They sat their horses side by side in the dark and the quiet and the starlight, and Anna thought of that first evening in October of 1878 when they had sat on this rise in the wagon on the way back from the ranch and watched the sunset together for the first time, and she felt the continuity of it, the long unbroken line from that moment to this one, all the ordinary and extraordinary days strung on it like beads. "Same sky," Elias said, looking up. "Better view," she said, which made him look at her, and she was looking at him, not at the stars, and he understood what she meant. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, which was not a simple thing to do on horseback, but which he managed with the ease of a man practiced at it, because he had been reaching for her hand across various spaces for 6 years, and intended to do it for many more. The horses stood steady beneath them, and the stars burned overhead, and the plain breathed around them in the September dark. And Anna Leland Watkins, who had come to the panhandle with $3 and a busted wagon wheel, and the stubborn conviction that there was more life to be had than what she had found so far, held her husband's hand under the Texas sky and knew, with the certainty of a woman who has found everything she was looking for, that she was exactly where she was always meant to be.